Do you ever feel lonely at night? The doors are locked, the windows are shut, but still, it feels like someone's watching you. That eerie feeling once terrified thousands of families across California for years. Back then, there was a criminal no one could identify, a man whose crimes kept entire communities living in fear. But thanks to new technology and decades of relentless investigation, his dark secret was finally uncovered after 40 years. Today, we're talking about the maniac who committed over 200 crimes and fooled the police as if they were kids. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button, it really helps us keep making quality content like this. Now, switch your brain to cosmic mode, because nothing in the universe can disturb you while you watch this story. In the mid-1970s, peaceful neighborhoods in California started experiencing strange and unsettling events. A mysterious intruder would sneak into homes at night, silently observing his victims without waking them. He left behind nothing but one thing: sheer panic and fear. At the time, he was known as the East Area Rapist. His methods were far from random. He would stalk his victims for days or even weeks, carefully studying their routines and the layout of their homes. Then, when the timing was perfect, he'd strike. What made him truly terrifying was how ghost-like he was. He seemed to be everywhere yet nowhere. The police could never catch him, he always vanished without a trace, leaving only disturbing clues behind. Sometimes he'd sneak into a victim's home, unlock doors, or even call them later using his own voice, just to taunt them. But this story isn't just about his crimes, it's about the decades-long manhunt that finally exposed the man behind the mask, the Golden State Killer. It all began in Sacramento, California, a city once known for its safety and calm neighborhoods. But in the fall of 1976, that peace was shattered. The first attacks followed a chilling pattern. The intruder struck late at night, when families felt the safest, tucked away in their homes. He would spend days watching them beforehand, learning every detail of their routines. Then, when the moment came, he'd slip inside without breaking a window or a lock. To the police, it was as if he had a magic key that opened every door. Inside the house, he moved quietly, room to room, before unleashing real terror. At first, his crimes seemed like simple burglaries. But he never stole money or valuables. Instead, he took personal items, family photos, keepsakes, even children's toys. These odd trophies made him even more disturbing. Eventually, his crimes escalated. He moved from theft to assault, and then to murder. The first known victim, whose identity remains confidential, told police, "I felt like someone was watching me for days. But I thought it was just my imagination." That was exactly what he wanted, to make people feel unsafe in their own homes. He fed on fear. The harder the police tried to catch him, the more untouchable he became, like a shadow that couldn't be trapped. By 1977, his attacks spread beyond Sacramento to other parts of California. The media and the public began calling him the East Area Rapist. Yet, no one had a clue who he really was. At first, he targeted single women, sometimes those with children. But later, he began attacking couples. His crimes became even more horrifying. Between January and April of 1977, there were 2 attacks each month. In May alone, 5. One each in September, November, and December. 3 more in October. Those were just the recorded assaults of that year. During home invasions, he'd tie up the men, then lead the women to another room, assaulting them repeatedly for hours. He used plates as a kind of alarm system, stacking them on the men's backs and threatening, "If I hear these plates move, everyone dies." He stayed inside homes for hours, moving around as if he lived there. Sometimes, if there was beer in the fridge, he'd grab one, step into the backyard, sit on a chair, and drink it, calm and confident, like he owned the place. He avoided leaving evidence, but occasionally, he'd toy with investigators, even calling some of his victims later, whispering, "You'll never catch me." He was confirmed to have committed 13 murders, 50 rapes, and more than 120 burglaries. These crimes didn't just ruin the lives of individual victims, they shook entire communities to their core. In California, people began checking whether a killer had ever struck in their neighborhood before they bought or rented a house. Nobody really knew what to do to protect themselves. Imagine someone breaking into your home late at night, tying up your husband, doing whatever he wanted to your wife, sometimes killing them both, sometimes leaving them alive. In many ways, that felt worse than death. Right after the first attack, investigators rushed to the scene and immediately started looking for clues. What stood out first was the disorder inside the house. Broken windows and items moved or subtly changed inside the home suggested the intruder was extremely careful. In that first attack, the woman had been alone. The intruder had tied up the man first, then assaulted the woman. After spending so much time with his victim, the attacker studied her physical and psychological state and then planned every step to avoid leaving traceable evidence. He carried out the assaults with extreme care, and before leaving he would put doors and windows back as he found them, sometimes removing a window pane and then replacing it so it looked untouched. One of the biggest pieces of evidence from that night was a set of footprints. Investigators analyzed those prints closely. The footprints revealed the size and type of his shoes, information that could help if they found the same shoes in the area. But the footwear was a common model, so the prints only moved the case forward by a little. Detectives also checked for any traces left when the intruder entered the home. They found no recent tests showing knife marks or identifiable fingerprints. That told investigators just how unusually cautious he was. He thought through every move, but he also took pains never to leave anything that would identify him. Victims, especially the first rape victim, said they never actually saw his face. They only remembered his dark clothing and the knife. That gave police a little more to go on, but still no clear description. According to the victims, the attacker's approach wasn't just physical, it was psychological. He humiliated and terrorized them repeatedly to establish dominance. After the early attacks, investigators began to notice similarities across the scenes. Each assault followed a similar method, though at first those were just hypotheses. As time passed and more evidence came in, detectives started to form a clearer picture of his overall strategy and his psychological profile. He always struck at night, entered homes quietly and deliberately, tied up the men, assaulted the women, and left without obvious traces. Those repeating patterns helped investigators understand his single-minded approach, but they still had trouble identifying him. His crimes mainly ran from the 1970s through the 1980s, and nobody could have imagined that the case would be solved only 40 years after his last known attack. The killer's methods were so secretive it felt like he was slipping through their hands. Solving those types of crimes in 1970s California was especially hard because modern forensic technology simply didn't exist yet. Police gathered and cataloged evidence, but it wasn't enough to identify him. The Golden State Killer planned every move carefully and rarely left suspicion behind. For instance, he wore gloves during attacks, avoided touching wet surfaces, and chose unique ways to enter each house. The clues inside victims' homes only deepened the mystery. Sometimes investigators discovered he'd casually eaten in the kitchen or turned on the TV, as if he'd taken time to sit and enjoy himself. The police kept asking how one person could commit such horrific acts for so long without being caught. One thing about him was certain: whenever he entered a house, he stayed for a long time. Sometimes, he didn't even touch his victims, he just watched them. But even that silent observation was enough to fill people with terror. Every time the police arrived at a new crime scene, it felt like they were dealing with a completely different criminal because he used slightly different methods each time. Another challenge for investigators was that the killer operated in different areas across California. At that time, police departments in different cities didn't have a fast or unified way to share information. So while one city's detectives were busy chasing leads, he was already attacking somewhere else. The Golden State Killer had one simple rule: keep moving. Changing locations constantly kept the police confused and made tracking him nearly impossible. For instance, in one area he would commit assaults, and in another, murders. This pattern made it difficult for law enforcement to connect the dots. In some cases, the killer would even call his victims afterward, just to terrify them again. People who heard his voice described it as something they could never forget. one survivor said. He laughed. That laugh stuck in my mind forever. It wasn't human, it sounded like an animal. But even those chilling phone calls couldn't help identify him. The phone technology at the time wasn't advanced enough to trace the calls. Police learned a lot about the Golden State Killer, his habits, his patterns, his methods, but they still couldn't figure out who he was. Every detective who worked the case poured years of their life into it, often without any progress. Over time, his crimes grew farther apart, eventually becoming cold cases. By 1986, he disappeared without a trace. Investigators were left holding piles of evidence, dozens of victims, and no name to attach to the horror. It wasn't just the police searching for him anymore, the entire community wanted answers. Even decades later, the trauma lingered in the hearts of survivors and their families. But while the case went cold, technology didn't stand still. Eventually, science would become the key to unlocking the mystery. By the 1990s, DNA testing had become a powerful new tool for solving crimes. However, early DNA technology could only identify a suspect if a direct sample from that person already existed in the system. That meant it still couldn't help find the Golden State Killer. They had DNA from crime scenes, but no idea whose it was. Then, by the 2000s, a new breakthrough arrived: genetic genealogy. This technique could identify someone through their distant relatives by comparing DNA samples to those in public genealogy databases. Investigators decided to give it a try, using DNA collected from the Golden State Killer's crime scenes to run a genealogical search. In 2018, detectives working on similar cold cases revisited the Golden State Killer investigation. They sent the old DNA evidence through the new system, and this time, it worked. The results pointed them toward a man named James DeAngelo. DeAngelo was 72 years old, a retired police officer living a quiet suburban life. The fact that the killer had once been a cop himself shocked even the most experienced investigators. During the years he committed his crimes, DeAngelo had worked in law enforcement, even helping investigate crimes similar to the ones he was secretly committing. That insider knowledge made him almost impossible to catch. But DNA didn't lie. It proved without doubt that James DeAngelo was the man behind the mask. On April 24, 2018, after more than 4 decades of terror and secrecy, the Golden State Killer was finally arrested. The mystery was solved, but it left behind even more haunting questions. How could someone who looked so normal, who had served as a police officer, commit such brutal crimes for so long? What drove him to do it? It took 40 years, countless detectives, and groundbreaking technology to finally close the case. But while justice was served, the lives of the victims were forever changed. During the trial, many survivors spoke in court. Their voices carried not just anger, but also a deep, long-awaited sense of relief. One of the survivors once said, "For years, I lived in fear, always thinking about his every move, always looking over my shoulder. But today, sitting here in this courtroom, looking at where he's sitting, I finally feel free again." Can you imagine? The emotional scars from what he did lasted a lifetime for so many people. During the trial, James DeAngelo never apologized. He didn't even try to claim innocence. He sat there in silence, frail, old, but still the same man who had terrorized California for decades. At one point, through his lawyers, he said only this: "I did it. I was there. But I didn't fully understand what I was doing." The court found DeAngelo guilty of multiple murders and dozens of sexual assaults. In 2020, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The decision left him with no way out. The man who once controlled others' lives would now spend the rest of his own behind bars. He was 74 years old when he entered prison, and whether that feels like justice or not, that's for you to decide. Let me know in the comments, what do you think would be the most fitting punishment for someone like him? For now, this is where we'll end our story. Stay safe, and until next time, goodbye.